All right, good morning. So, anybody know the song? Toy Story 4? The latest Randy Newman piece to win an Academy Award. The Academy Awards were last night. This one, he was nominated for Best Song. And Toy Story 4 won Best Animated Feature. Ford versus Ferrari won some Oscars last night, and because Disney acquired Fox, that's kind of into the Disney fold now. So Disney had a few different wins last night as a company at the Oscars. So as far as the syllabus, go over the syllabus real quickly, and then we're also going to go over assignment number 1 or case study number 1. So you remember today, day 1 talking about the Disney acquisitions. So the acquisitions of Disney going back to ESPN and ABC, capital cities, and then actually moving all the way up to Fox and kind of what that means moving into the future. Next week, remember we said we're going to have a discussion / vote over who is the best Marvel superhero in the MCU. All right? So that'll be what we do next week. So, in order to get that set up, I thought I could come up with 16 different Marvel characters and we could debate them. However, I would like to put it in your hands a little bit too. So, what I'm asking each person to do, take out a slip of paper, make a note on your phones and email them to me, send in an email, whatever. I want to know your 3 MCU Marvel superheroes that are your favorite, and that can be favorite for whatever reason. It can be because they're most powerful, it could be because they're the funniest, or whatever. All right? But I want to have your 3 top MCU Marvel superheroes, okay? So, that could, because he's had such a mixed up history in the MCU, that could include Loki, if you want to include Loki. Because he's been, he's the god of mischief. So, get those. I'll collect those at the end of class. What I'm going to do, I will compile those. Then I'll come up with sort of a tournament bracket in which next week we will vote on them, and you'll be able to make your arguments and make your persuasions trying to get people to vote. By the end of next week, we will have voted and be the authority on who is the best or favorite MCU superhero. Sound fair? Not everybody's enrolled in a class that's called being a fan of Disney, so I think that's pretty fair.
Do you want us to write the reason why? List the 3? Like why?
Yeah, you know what? Why don't you? That would be kind of interesting. Yeah. If you don't have to, but if you would like, write why they are your favorite, or what attribute about them is the best. Okay? Any questions over that? All right. So, and then that will, after we talk about Marvel, the MCU heroes next week, we will then talk about the Disney movies. So the 24th, we'll talk about Disney movies, and that will be mostly about the movies the corporation has made, or subsidiaries have made. The second time that we talk about that on March 2nd will be fan films. Okay, this being a fan class, there's a lot of information you can garner from people who make films based off of their favorite heroes favorite characters, favorite storylines. And then that'll take us into spring break. And after spring break, remember that's when we will be at the Paradiso for the Pixar, the Disney Pixar movie Onward. All right, we'll have more information about that in the coming weeks because the way that typically works is usually 1 week before is when I'm able to purchase the tickets. So once I purchase the tickets, I will, because that'll be after spring break, I'll let everybody know, okay, this is what we're doing. Here's the plan for sure. All right. Any questions over that? All right. As far as, and then also we'll point out, we do have Disney Plus content for the next 4 weeks. So for this week, watch a movie from Marvel, Pixar, Star Wars of your choice. All right, for this weekend, next week. Try to watch something. Try to watch 2 different movies, and I'll include in there, like for Star Wars, if you want to watch some of the episodes of Mandalorian, or you want to watch the season of Mandalorian, you can watch that as well. How many people have watched that show? How many people? What were your thoughts? Yeah. So, I grew up on Star Wars. I was born at the tail end of the original trilogy. Okay, so I'm always kind of like an original trilogy person. However, I'm not one of these people that I enjoyed episodes 1, 2, and 3. We talked about this earlier in the semester. What are your favorite movies and it was some of the later movies that have come out. And I enjoyed episode 7. Episode 8 was a little distracting to me. I had a little different feeling from episode 8. So I wasn't real excited about seeing episode 9. I was going to see it because I had seen everything else. But I wasn't real excited about it until I watched The Mandalorian. And The Mandalorian did get me excited in watching Star Wars again. And even following some other content, like reading other books and listening to audiobooks about Star Wars and Black Spire Outpost, which is the new addition to Disneyland and Hollywood Studios of Walt Disney World. The Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, that is a standalone planet called Batuu. And the area where you actually are is called Black Spire Outpost. So you walk through and you kind of have your own adventure as a visitor. So that's the Disney Plus content. We'll go over the case study number 1 now as well. We talked about it briefly earlier in the semester. But here is the first case study. So this is, the title of it is What Disney Means to Me. What you're going to do in the case study, you're really going to follow, you're going to talk about your exposure to Disney and what you think Disney means to you. And you're going to follow these tick marks down the page. So it's a 2 to 3 page paper. You're going to discuss what age was it that you were first exposed to Disney? Who first exposed you to Disney? Family member, friend, etc. What connections do you have with Disney? Either parks, movies, characters, ESPN, ABC, anything. Books, the comics, live theater, anything that you have, the cruises, keep going. Then, what do you consider your strongest connection from Disney? So everything that you identify that you have a connection with, what do you think is the strongest connection you have with the corporation? All right. The 4th thing you will do is talk about what Disney means to you. And then a subplot of that is or subpoint of that is what do you think Disney means to society as a whole? All right. And then this bottom tick down here is just Disney can refer to the person, it can refer to parks, it can refer to anything within the corporation. All right. So as far as the layout for the paper, here's the layout. Here's your headings that you'll use first exposure to Disney, these all follow the tick marks up top, okay? My connections to Disney is the second. Strongest connection with Disney is the third. And then what Disney means to me in society is the fourth. All right? Then down at the bottom, this will be turned in by 11 a.m. on the 17th. So next week, all right? Any questions over this?
So you want us to use all of the headings in like different sections?
Yeah. So you'll use, so when you use the heading first exposure to Disney, then you'll discuss this first tick mark. The second, you'll just follow down. So yeah, it separates the paper into different sections. Any other questions?
Any like specific format you want to use?
I mean, we use APA typically. Just kind of what's generally accepted format as far as everything left justified, beginning of paragraphs, intended, things like
As long as like organized.
that. Yeah. As long as I can make sense of it, I'm okay with that. Any other questions? All right. And I have, in the past, allowed people to, in lieu of the paper, to create a video discussing this. So if you would like to do that in lieu of the paper, you discuss a video, run down all of these things where you talk about these. Keep it to about under 2 minutes. Let's keep it under 2 minutes if you can. And then you submit that on the Dropbox. All right. All right, so before we get started with the acquisitions, what did you all think last week of our guest speaker?
I thought that was cool. Yeah,
Has anybody read those books? Or listened to any of those books? They really are. He said, you know, if you're a writer and you're writing nonfiction, you really kind of what has to happen for a book to be successful is you have to have a connection with these characters. And you definitely do. You start thinking about it starts off with 5 kids, then there's 2 other kids that are central to all the stories, so 7 kids, and then it kind of expands from there, and they're bringing in all these other people that you start to relate to certain things that are going on in their group dynamic. And then, as he said, you know, people have emailed him asking like, "Hey, how is Finn's day today?" or "How is Willa doing today?" So it's kind of interesting to talk about with that. So if you were ever interested in those books, they're on the syllabus. You can read them or get them in audio. They're all in audiobook format as well. I really enjoy the audiobook format because I'm walking around listening to them. So, anything else before we get started on the acquisitions? All right. So, what I wanted to do today is just give you a quick rundown of how Disney has expanded really over the last close to 20 years. And it started before that in the early 80s. Does anybody know what happened in the 80s? Who became CEO in the 80s? Okay, Michael Eisner became CEO of the Walt Disney Company in 1984. And before that, the company was largely dependent on their animation, and they were largely dependent on their parks. In the early 80s, before Michael Eisner took over, the parks made up about 2/3 of the revenue that the company was bringing in. And animation was falling behind other competitor studios. So Roy Disney's son, worked to bring in Michael Eisner and his partners so that they could revitalize animation and revitalize the company. The first 10 years of the Michael Eisner era were seen with pretty much unprecedented growth within the company, especially in the theme park realm. They added MGM Studios, which is now Hollywood Studios in Orlando. They opened Tokyo Disney. They built more hotels at Walt Disney World so that they could, the whole purpose during that first 10 years was to try to get people to stay at their parks longer. All right, they had data to suggest that at that time in the early 80s, when Michael Eisner took over, it was basically Magic Kingdom at Epcot and then a shopping center that made up Walt Disney World and a few other hotels. So they had data to suggest that people stayed about 2 to 2.5 days on property. So they wanted to open up a third gate, and they wanted to start opening up water parks and other attractions that they could do there to keep people engaged with their property longer, rather than people coming to Florida to go to Disney World for a few days and then go to the Space Coast or go to one of the coasts, go to one of the beaches. They were trying to keep people on property for as long during their vacation as they could, which is why now, if you go to Walt Disney World in Orlando, you see there's a lot of different themed resorts. All right, so there's one themed around the boardwalk, kind of the famous boardwalks of New Jersey and the East Coast. There's one themed around New Orleans. There's one themed around the beach culture. Getting people to stay was kind of what they wanted to do. So when the 90s hit, Disney was trying to then expand their market or expand their company beyond just animation and parks. So we see ABC ESPN in 1985 was purchased. ABC was purchased by Capital Cities Communications for $3.5 billion. Right? It was seen when ABC was purchased by Capital Cities Communications. It was seen as, and Bob Iger in his book calls it, the goldfish eating Goliath, something like that. That this small company kind of taking in this conglomerate media corporation. So in turn, 1996, Capital Cities ABC is purchased by Disney for $19 billion. That meant that they assumed 8% stake in ESPN at the time. So ABC was the first network to really invest in Disneyland when Walt Disney himself was trying to build Walt Disneyland, and his team were trying to build Walt Disneyland in the 50s. He couldn't get funding. Remember, we talked about this 2 weeks ago. He couldn't get funding to build Disneyland, so he started creating a weekly show for the young company, ABC, called Disneyland. It was an hour weekly show that he could show old content and he could discuss the building of the new theme park. So when Disneyland first opened, ABC owned stake in the Disneyland theme park. So kind of things coming full circle, 1996, Disney purchases ABC and Capital Cities. Michael Eisner, from that point on, things became pretty contentious within the company. There were a series of personnel issues that people thought were handled poorly, that added to or kind of led to people wanting Michael Eisner to step down as CEO. One of the biggest reasons or biggest kind of points of contention near the end of his career was the relationship with Pixar and Steve Jobs. Who knows Steve Jobs? What's Steve Jobs known for? Apple. So Steve Jobs was actually, he owned the majority stake in Pixar at the time as well. In the early 2000s, from Pixar's beginning, and then in the early 2000s, his relationship with Michael Eisner had become poor enough that he actually publicly stated Pixar was going to start looking for other distribution agreements with other studios. Because originally when Toy Story was opened, when Toy Story first premiered, titles from Toy Story through The Incredibles were released under agreement with Disney. They were not labeled Disney Pixar as the movies we are going onward that we'll see in March, or the movies you see now in theaters. They were Disney releases. They were Pixar releases, but they were released through the Disney name. So the success of Toy Story, the success of Bug's Life, Finding Nemo, up to The Incredibles, really kind of led to this animosity between the two companies. Pixar thought, or Steve Jobs thought, Pixar was not getting enough credit for what Pixar was bringing to the Disney brand. And in turn, Disney, Michael Eisner and others, felt that Disney should receive more credit because of their brand name and because of what they were able, the cachet they were able to put behind the Pixar brand. Pixar couldn't do it all on their own. They needed funding. Another thing that added to the contention was Disney wanted, the original agreement was 3 movies, I believe. And Toy Story was so successful, Disney wanted, the first agreement was 5. Disney wanted to make a Toy Story 2. They wanted to make a sequel. And it was originally going to be a sequel straight to video release, because that's what Disney was doing at the time. They were taking movies like The Lion King, Little Mermaid, Aladdin, and they were making straight to video sequels to those, just for video consumption. So they wanted to do this with Pixar, and they wanted to do it with Toy Story 2. However, upon viewing kind of the first viewings of Toy Story 2, they decided that they were going to make it a theatrical release. So it went on to make a lot of money as well. However, Disney did not want to treat Toy Story 2 as part of their agreement with Pixar, because it was a sequel. It wasn't a new kind of content movie, if you will. Obviously, Pixar would not like this. They wouldn't agree to this, so that added to that contention. So, 2004, Comcast Corporation steps in and tries to make a hostile takeover, makes a bid for a hostile takeover of the Disney Corporation. Disney stockholders vote no confidence toward Michael Eisner, and then this unfolds and ends with Michael Eisner agreeing to step down at the end of his contract, which was going to expire in 2006. Once Disney named Bob Iger his successor, they sped up the process of Michael Eisner stepping down, and Bob Iger became CEO of Walt Disney Company in 2005. So if you listen to his book or you read the book Bob Iger wrote, Ride of a Lifetime, he has a chapter dedicated to the Pixar deal, and it's extremely interesting. As well as he has chapters dedicated to Marvel, Star Wars, and the Fox acquisitions as well. But one of the things he immediately recognized as when he became CEO was going to open one of the international theme parks, which was the last kind of big event under Michael Eisner's tenure. Bob Iger realized that of the parade of characters walking down Main Street, there were very few Disney characters from the last decade or so. They were either the classic characters like Snow White, Cinderella, the princesses that people knew, or they were Pixar characters. And so he realized that this is a relationship they really needed to foster, and they needed to keep going. So it would be hard to make inroads with Pixar because of the relationship Steve Jobs had with Michael Eisner. So they actually, and Bob Iger talks about this in his book as well, they actually Disney was one of the first companies to put content on Apple's newest iPod Video. They released shows like Desperate Housewives on there. And that kind of opened the door to building this relationship with Steve Jobs, which ultimately led to 2006, Disney purchasing Pixar for $7.4 billion, which at that time was a massive deal. It was a massive purchase. And is what made Steve Jobs a billionaire for the first time, because he became the largest shareholder of the Walt Disney Company. So 2006, go back in your Pixar history. Anybody know what movie came out? What Pixar movie would have come out in 2006? Cars. Cars was the last movie in the extended agreement that would have been released under Disney. So if Disney would not have made a deal with Pixar and purchased Pixar, Cars would have been the last movie released under Disney. Then Pixar would have gone their separate way. As it is, Cars was the first movie to be released under Disney Pixar, and the reason it was called Disney Pixar, as discussed in his book, is the two of the higher ups, John Lasseter and Ed Catmull at Pixar. John Lasseter no longer with Walt Disney Company. They were going to also run the animation studios for Disney. So they wanted to call it Disney Pixar so that it would help with the brands of both companies. That is different from Star Wars and Marvel, where you don't see, when a Marvel movie comes out, it doesn't say Disney Marvel. It just says Marvel or Marvel Studios, right? There isn't anything that says Disney Lucasfilm. It just says Lucasfilm, right? The reason it's called Disney Pixar is for the branding purposes for the animation studios. So, Cars was the first to be released under the Disney Pixar label. And then after that, the next big acquisition that the company made was Marvel in 2009. Iron Man and the Incredible Hulk had released in theaters to a lot of fanfare and a lot of box office success in 2008. And so Disney wanted to make inroads with Marvel. In 2009 is when they ended up making the final purchase of $4.24 billion. Now, Marvel's a little bit different because think about all the different labels that Marvel movies are released under. The newest Spider-Man movies, what are they released under? Are they released under Disney or Marvel? Sony, right? The Incredible Hulk in 2008 was released under Universal. Universal owns the right to the Incredible Hulk. Sony owns the rights to Spider-Man. And if you saw over the summer, the negotiations between Disney and Sony to continue their relationship, to have Spider-Man appear in the MCU, and to have Kevin Feige work with Sony to create these Spider-Man movies. The reason that exists, those relationships exist, is when Marvel in the 70s and 80s, they were trying to get their content on television or in theaters. So Stan Lee moved from Manhattan to Hollywood and started trying to negotiate all of these deals. And ultimately what it ended up with is the studios would take some of the largest names. So Sony took Spider-Man. Universal had the Incredible Hulk. Fox had Fantastic Four and X-Men. And the X-Men movies in the early 2000s were some of the first superhero movies to reach the level of success that they did, right? And then the Spider-Man movies in the early 2000s kind of supplanted or implanted in people's minds that superhero movies could work at the theater, all right? So it's incredible. You think about what the MCU and Marvel Entertainment has done with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, with essentially without their grade A heroes, the characters that were known by most of the people. I mean, how many people had ever heard of Guardians of the Galaxy before the movies? Yeah, it's very kind of small brand of characters that, you know, kind of in a way made the MCU explode onto the scene for a lot of people, didn't it? Like seeing like, hey, they took these characters that people don't really know about and they made this great entertaining story. That led a lot of people to start watching and consuming the MCU on a large level. So, and then the third large acquisition the fourth large acquisition was Star Wars in 2012. LucasFilm was purchased by Disney for $4.05 billion. And so here are the titles and the properties that have been opened under the Disney title or Disney name. So with ABC, ESPN, the ESPN Wide World of Sports opened March 28th, 1997. Has anybody ever been to the Wide World of Sports? It's a massive professional and amateur sport complex on Walt Disney World property in Orlando. And AAU, anybody in here ever played AAU, Amateur Athletic Union? They are headquartered on Walt Disney World property. Their headquarters are actually in the building where it was the former Welcome Center that people could go to in the late 60s and early 70s when Walt Disney World was being opened. That's where AAU's headquarters are. It's right kind of in that drive up to Disney Springs if you go to Walt Disney World in Orlando. So it's a massive on-site sports complex to bring people into competitions. The Atlanta Braves used to play spring training at the Wide World of Sports. They just moved to a different location. But it brings in a lot of visitors to that area every year. The Pixar titles released under Disney, we can run down: Cars, Ratatouille, WALL-E, Up, Toy Story 3, Cars 2, Brave, Monsters University, Inside Out, The Good Dinosaur, Finding Dory, Cars 3, Coco, Incredibles 2, Toy Story 4, Onward, and there's one more that's not up there. That's going to be released summer of 2020. Does anybody know what it is? Soul. They're going to release that in the summer of 2020. The Marvel Entertainment titles to be released under Disney: Iron Man 2, Thor, Captain America, the First Avenger, Marvel's The Avengers. Iron Man 3, Thor, The Dark World, Captain America, The Winter Soldier, Guardians of the Galaxy, Avengers Age of Ultron, Ant-Man, Captain America Civil War, Doctor Strange, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Spider-Man Homecoming, Thor Ragnarok, Black Panther, Avengers Infinity War, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Captain Marvel, Avengers Endgame, and Spider-Man Far From Home. And there are a litany of movies that are being released starting May 1st with Black Widow. Then you have the Eternals in the fall. And 4 or 5 others. I can't remember one of the titles names. But The Legend of the Ten Rings. And then leading up to Thor: Love and Thunder to close out they're starting the 4th phase of the MCU with Black Widow. And then Thor: Love and Thunder will finish off phase 5 of the MCU. And remember, the MCU tells their stories in phases they sort of culminate, each phase culminates with like a larger story. So phase 1 was culminated with the Avengers. Okay. Then phase 2 started with Iron Man 3 and culminated with Civil War. All right. So they kind of tell these stories in phases so they can draw on story arcs and character arcs. The titles released under Star Wars are released under Disney for Star Wars. Episode 7, The Force Awakens. Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. Episode 8, The Last Jedi. Solo, A Star Wars Story. And then Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. So, of these, Marvel movies released under Disney. Tell me, what's the best one?
Civil War.
Civil War. It is really good. I watched it the other day.
I like Winter Soldier.
Winter Soldier, kind of seen as one of the first critically successful movies. The Winter Soldier.
Oh, probably the first Guardians of the Galaxy.
First Guardians of the Galaxy. What'd you think about the Volume 2?
To me, it wasn't as good just because it seemed kind of like they forced the script a little bit.
I think people I've talked to that really liked the first one. The second one wasn't as entertaining to them. Others.
Thor Ragnarok.
Ragnarok. Everybody know what happened with Thor Ragnarok at its premiere. Who plays Hulk? Mark Ruffalo. Did anybody know what Mark Ruffalo did?
Yeah, he was live streaming, and he didn't know it. He was on Instagram, and he had a live video of the first few minutes of the movie.
Yeah. So he was live streaming backstage to try to engage with people. He didn't know how to. It's a hilarious watch on YouTube. The number of times he's told the story. It's a hilarious story of how this all happened. But he thought he turned off the live stream. He didn't. He puts it in his pocket, and the first 20 minutes or so of the movie is live streamed. And people are texting him all the time and tweeting him or Instagramming him, messaging him, whatever. And then over the weekend, this is the first time I heard this and watched this video. So obviously, he was real worried that something bad was going to happen. Right? Someone from Disney comes down, tells him to turn off his phone. He spends the next 24 hours, he said, just in horror of what he had done and what was going to happen, if he was going to be fired or what. And he gets a call from Kevin Feige and, apologizes profusely. Kevin Feige essentially says, we can't do this. We can't. We got to be more careful. And then the next day, he said he was going to do he was going to do promo for Thor Ragnarok, and he shows up and he apologizes to Kevin Feige again. And Kevin Feige gives him a huge hug and he says, "This was genius." He said, "We couldn't have paid for the type of press we've gotten off of this." That live stream, people just heard him laughing the whole time. Because remember, the first two Thor movies, people didn't really know how to react to, right? The third one, Thor Ragnarok, is one of the funniest movies I have seen in a long time, MCU or non-MCU, Disney or non-Disney. Other ideas, best MCU movie under the Disney brand. No Infinity War, no Endgame? Just not the best, huh?
I think Infinity War is better than Endgame.
Why? This is a popular argument.
I like when the bad guy wins.
Okay. That is why people have said they like Infinity, because it's an unexpected ending, right? We expect for the heroes to win at the end. And so a lot of people liked Infinity War for that reason. Raise your hand if you agree. Infinity War over Endgame. All right. Does that mean everyone else is Endgame over Infinity War? All right. So here's more, you can see in larger font, the titles under Disney for each of these. And then most recently, Disney acquired Fox. And this deal closed within the last year for $71.3 billion. Now, it's a very interesting story how it reached over $70 billion. That was not the initial bid. Comcast Corporation, which, remember, as I said, in 2004 had made a bid for a hostile takeover of the Disney Corporation. Comcast comes in at the last minute and they make a higher bid for the Fox Corporation that Disney had. And Disney had done their homework and they had worked out that here's what Disney was going to have, like 20th Century Fox, 20th Century Fox Searchlight, the Fox Sports Networks. They were going to have controlling percentage of Hulu. They weren't going to have Fox Business, Fox News. They weren't going to have Fox Television. And then Comcast comes in and makes a higher bid, right? So in secret, you read about this in Bob Iger's book. In secret, Disney flies to London to make a secret proposal to Fox so that they would present it to their shareholders, and that's the deal that ended up. This is where it ended up coming from. And in the book, he talks about why they didn't go up just kind of dollar per dollar, because they're talking about shares at this point. They didn't go up like dollar by dollar. They wanted to go up, I think, $4 a share, so that Comcast would have to think long and hard about upping their bid anymore. So they closed the deal for $71.3 billion, and some of the largest things that have happened from that, the 20th Century Fox, I don't know if you've seen it, bless you, over the last 2 weeks, 20th Century Fox it no longer says 20th Century Fox. What does it say? Has anybody seen the crawl now? Or the image at the first of the movies? It's 20th Century Studios. And instead of 20th Century Fox Searchlight, it's now 20th Century Searchlight. The kind of public reason for this that's been stated is to get away from the Fox brand, because like Fox Television and Fox Business, Fox News, things like that, to try to separate from the Fox brand, and kind of further bring in those properties into the Disney fold. Now, I'll skip the third bullet point under there for a minute. They also now have controlling stake in Hulu. They own 30% of Hulu. Fox owned 30% of Hulu. The rest was owned, some by Comcast, Universal, and other subsidiaries or other companies. When they purchased Fox, they purchased their percentage in Hulu, so they then had 60%. Then they went on to purchase control or decision-making power and the percentage from Comcast. So now they own the vast majority of Hulu. And for those of you who have kept up with Hulu, Disney Plus, ESPN Plus, you can bundle those three together. Hulu is kind of the platform to put the more the content that the company doesn't want to put on Disney Plus, because maybe it's for older audiences or things like that, more mature audiences. They put that on Hulu. Television, what they got? They have Fox's library, including channels like FX, FXX, and National Geographic. If you've watched Disney Plus so far, you've seen there's National Geographic is one of the 5 featured kind of properties on Disney Plus. And one of the best shows, one of the most entertaining shows to me on Disney Plus is The World According to Jeff Goldblum. So if you haven't watched it, watch it. They're short episodes. It's great. He talks about sneakers, barbecue, jewelry, makeup. He talks about a bunch. Like each week, he would talk about a different thing, and there were 12 episodes this first season.
Do they have Fox Sports?
So Fox Sports, when they were going through the regulatory procedures with Fox Sports, they had to agree to get rid of Fox Sports. And if they sold off or divested from Fox Sports, then things were going to move a lot quicker. So all of these talks were going on at the same time. Comcast was trying to make their bid, and when Disney made their kind of secret bid, they had worked out with the legislature, the federal level, that if they divest from Fox Sports, then things will move much quicker. So they agreed to do that. And then when you look at the competition or relationship between the Disney Company, the Disney Corporation, and Comcast Universal, and you look at that relationship and how it unfolded, that competition, how it unfolded around the Fox deal, some people see Disney having to sell off the Fox Sports properties as a plus for Comcast, because Comcast was then able to get Sky Sports and kind of take over a lot of that content, or some of that content. And they didn't have to worry about the expanded sports content that Disney would have over ESPN.
Does this mean that the Alien franchise and Predators and AVP, is this all part of Disney now?
So it's an interesting discussion about media conglomerates. You now have, I just read this morning, you now have these mega media conglomerates who are essentially buying out each other. Who's going to be the last one standing if it comes to that? And frankly, I would give a good chance to a company like Disney being one who could do that. The same thing with streaming now. How many people in here watch traditional cable? Yeah, you stream everything, don't you? In 5 years, within 5 years, I could definitely see some company saying, hey, you know what, instead of spending money on Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, HBO Plus, all of these different things, and you're running your bill up to well over $150, $200. Let's package everything, and then we're going to offer it. We're under the same traditional cable model. It's just now everything's streamed, right? And I can see a company like Disney doing that, because one thing that the corporation has done, and they are very good at, they have a lot of resources. And when you have a lot of resources, you can buy up a lot of content. You can buy up a lot of other companies.
So would you say that they're like a monopoly?
So they are not, according to the federal government. That's one reason they got rid of the Fox Sports properties, is so they would have an easier legislative path or regulatory path to making the Fox purchase. Because when you talk about things like the Sherman Act and antitrust law, that's what they exist for, so that companies cannot form monopolies and essentially put everyone else out of business. So, according to the federal government, no, they are not. According to, I think, a lot of people, it's questionable. A lot of people have opinions. And then they also have a lot of international exposure and mediums now. In some of the largest international markets that Disney didn't have, it's kind of the mediums to use that they do at their exposure now. The last thing we'll talk about, X-Men and Fantastic Four, with the last few minutes that we have, because purchasing Fox brings in X-Men and they bring in the Fantastic Four into the MCU. And so as soon as that happened, and before it happened, rumors started going regarding how are they going to bring these characters into the MCU. Any Fantastic Four fans in here? Any X-Men fans in here? Okay. So, has everyone watched the trailer for Black Widow? Do you think when Red Guardian is being broken out of prison, is that a mutant who's blowing down the door behind him? That could be how they introduce mutants, and the first introduction of mutants and X-Men, or X-Men type characters into the fold. We'll have to see May 1st, right? Be really interesting. So, any questions? All right. Today like I said, was kind of our overview of the corporation and kind of the corporate side of it. Next week, we'll get to our discussion over Marvel superhero characters. So, if you have your piece of paper, bring them up after class. If you did it on a note or email or something, email that to me. All right? See everyone next week. Thank you.